It's happening. Adults across the country can buy cannabis. People have a lot of questions, so I invited some friends over to talk about it. Joining me today is Michael Lickver from Cannabis Wheaton.
Valuations are sometimes absolutely absurd.
Anthony George, a stock market trader.
I think it kills the people that are the real people in the business.
And Tamara Hirsh, a dispensary founder.
We're going to have an oversaturation.
I'm Chuck Rifici, and we're talking the biz. Some claim cannabis stocks are overvalued. Do you agree?
You know what? I think probably 60% of them are overvalued, and I think 40% of them are fairly valued at this point, in my opinion.
Can you expand on that? What do you think gets you to the
Well,
top?
I think you get 60% overvalued because they're being pulled along by the bigger names, the ones that have an infrastructure, the ones that have a corporate plan, the ones that are already marketing what they're doing, so they have a real following of core investors, really strong retail investors that believe in the space and believe in what that company stands for. And then you have other deals that are just dragged along that don't have that same maturity and that same marketing. So that's why I say some are and some aren't.
Yeah, I'd probably say generally all are, but they're valued on future value. All of these producers, if we're just talking about producers, I mean, cannabis stocks is broad, but if I'm limiting it to producers, they're probably overvalued if you're looking just at the domestic market. But as shelf space unlocks, new products are going to be offered, and we're seeing a hockey stick rate of export, then I think they'll be able to catch up. But currently, it's tough for me to believe that any of them are not overvalued, even a little bit.
If you look at the oil industry, though, for the last 20 years, and companies get valued in the billions, but they never make a profit because they're always valued about what they're building as a resource to get taken out. So, I mean, that went on for 20 years.
Yeah, I mean, you can look at the tech industry as well, right?
Yeah.
And valuations are sometimes absolutely absurd there with no revenues and no even future prospect of revenue. So I guess, valuation is what people are willing to pay for it. So it's an interesting argument.
We see that also going to international deals. I mean, we have Canadian companies making investments in other jurisdictions, even in Jamaica. I mean, does that extend to cannabis companies kind of globally, or just those that have a Canadian component?
Well,
does that matter?
Tamara's way better to talk about Jamaica.
Well, I'm looking at the export right now. All the big players are looking at establishing in all the different countries to be able to grow as much as they can, set an infrastructure and a footprint everywhere, which is great in keeping the market strong, and it's keeping Canadians thirsty. We're not close to meeting a demand here. We're not meeting a medical demand, and we're certainly not going to meet a recreational demand. So in that respect, that's great. But as we keep issuing licenses and we keep sending it all to export, and one day these countries are all established and self-sufficiently producing, and our product's not going out of the country and it's going to satisfy the domestic, we're going to have an oversaturation.
Well, certainly, I mean, I think the small number of licensees in Canada has been helpful for valuations. I mean, generally, do we think valuations, there's a lot of volatility. And so to some extent, is that question really is a matter of timing? I mean, from when somebody gets in or out of the market, that could be a good or bad trade just based on the week, on any given week.
If you look at the day-to-day action in the stocks, I mean, there's market hysteria and guys get all crazy. The actual stock market itself as a functioning thing is broken. That's why you get these crazy gyrations. After 2008, when everyone took their capital back out of the markets, you didn't have guys that risked like millions and millions like we used to do. So that got taken out of the market. So you get these crazy gyrations because of the lack of big players putting up capital. So as the industry matures and the banks come into the business, which we're seeing them come in now, BMO's in, CIBC now is bidding on all kinds of deals. So they're coming in, so that capital will come in and that will stop the gyrations. But it also brings in that whole big massive group of retail buying that sits in those RSPs and the banks. So the valuations will stay strong, as far as I can tell.
Well, things like with ETFs, we see a lot of marijuana ETFs, cannabis ETFs. Do you think that ETFs really create, do they make that worse?
I think it creates no value in the space, ETFs. Like, I think it hurts the space because guys, instead of buying Cannabis Wheaton or buying Canopy, they go buy this ETF instead of being a fan of the company. So I would hope there's, you know, not a lot of these ETFs because it really does take away our...
Well, it seems to keep coming. I mean, Mike, do you agree on the ETF side? I mean, do you see it as a negative or a neutral?
As an advisor to one of the current ETFs, I'll probably stay neutral on this. I think he made some great points. I wouldn't dispute them. I just feel like in the same way a mutual fund acts, it's a friendlier way for people to get introduced to the space, and at least in their mind, they're diversifying their risk. So from the company perspective, not as great as having that fan, that shareholder that really believes in your story. But from the perspective of people playing the market that wouldn't otherwise play the market, if that's the case, if there's a selection of people that feel comfortable putting their money into a diversified fund that can touch the space multiple prongs versus not putting their money in, then in that circumstance, I would be a fan of them.
Yeah, I think our industry is based on the retail investor. And I haven't seen a quality group of investors like come into a space in a long time like this. And they're coming in for weed. And it'd be a shame if that all gets directed into managed money, which is, you know, passive kind of, you know, they're passive. They don't believe in the name.
It doesn't give, you know, the investor has an opportunity to help shape successes. If, like you said, if they like the story, then they're going to, you know, support that company through funding, and that company is going to do better.
New Strike's the greatest example.
It's an involvement in helping shape history. Yeah.
New Strike's the greatest example. Trades at a $600 million valuation.
And that's the hip.
Yeah,
that's right.
Yeah, it's the tragically hip. And I mean, everybody in Canada, when they buy that stock, they're going to own that stock.
Well, they're literally buying hip, right? The
That's what they
hip.
say.
Yeah. Well, it certainly highlights the marketing element of creating value with your shares. I mean, Tamara, you know, as an entrepreneur building your cannabis business, you know, you're not public right now, but do you find that public valuations, they seem to lift the private company valuations? I mean, do you see, if we agree that they're overvalued, you know, do you find that's helpful or hurtful as a private company?
Public or private, I don't, you know, I'm honestly on the fence constantly about that. I do hear about a lot of inflation. I don't know if that hurts. Like you said, I think it actually helps. It helps in a way, but I mean, only the people that are interested in investing in private companies are far and few between, and they're well-funded and involved. So that limits your chance for growth. You have a smaller pool of people to work with. Whereas in a public company, it's a different story. So does that hurt or help? I'm not sure. I don't know how to answer that.
Yeah, we are seeing some regulatory changes with micro licensing, and I think the licensing cost comes down as you get to the 90th and 100th license, but it certainly is still, there is a regulatory kind of capture there.
You have to admit though, it sucks that we don't see the real, you know, people in there like.
Well, I guess, you know, on that, I mean,
would you agree? Like, you got Vic Island out there with the most amazing grows, and you know, everybody dies for BC Bud, and you know, and I don't want to diss any, you know, growers, but I mean, you meet the management team and like, oh, I don't smoke. It's like, oh fuck, this is gonna be really good fucking weed, right? Like,
yeah, but I don't think you can.
I agree.
I mean, it's controversial position, but I don't think you can entirely blame the licensing system for the real growers not taking part. The real growers that want to take part can take part.
They can't because they have a criminal record. They were already banned from it. Anybody with a criminal record could not start. There's not one guy with a criminal record that started a licensed producer in Canada.
Well, I think there's an issue if you have a criminal record, if you were working in the black market and had charges, you wouldn't want to be the point person on a file. But there are ways to be. You could be an investor though.
You could be an investor.
You could be a founder.
But you had to invest through your dad.
Well, you could probably invest directly.
That's not true. They never looked at beneficial ownership, ever.
I'm just agree to disagree because I know a lot of them that. And you know a lot of them, right?
Absolutely.
Like,
I can name a dozen people off the top of my head that have
are,
decades of experience that are not sure how to find their way into the market and have so much talent to offer and substance to companies.
Well, sorry to be blunt, but I think we need to wrap the conversation here. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks, Ombre.
Thanks for having us.